Welcome to Unleashing Happiness with Cecilia Hendricks, the podcast where we'll share ways to change your mindset, change your habits, and change your life. Happy Friday. Welcome back to Unleashing Happiness. Today's episode is really going to focus on emotional intelligence. The tools that I have found that have really helped me deal with my emotions, get more curious about my emotions, and also give myself forgiveness and some grace with the way that I'm feeling, the emotions that are coming up for me. I definitely fell into the loop of toxic positivity, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit today, just because I found some trends when I was getting myself out of that loop that I think could help others when you're listening to this to make sure that you don't fall into the same cycle. Any kind of law of attraction, law of assumption, Neville Goddard, Joseph Murphy, or even just like a thinking positive, having a positive mindset type of community falls, unfortunately, really quickly into this toxic positivity and really starts to vilify the emotions that you feel that are deemed negative by yourself or even others or society. And that just really creates a struggle within your mind of going back and forth of whether you should be feeling something. Did you ruin something because your mind didn't stay on the right path? If you have kind of a day that you're just feeling down, are you just kind of going to fall into a little bit of a spiral? And the tools that I'm going to share today helped me make sure that I didn't fall into a spiral and that I was able to very quickly bring myself out of it and bring myself out of it without much force. I think that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned and things that felt the best is I was like, wow, as I'm doing these things, I'm naturally starting to feel this way. I'm naturally forgiving myself more. And it just feels better overall. Like as a person, I feel much better. In addition, I wanted to let everybody know that kicking off on Labor Day here in the US, so that'll be Monday, September 3rd, I am kicking off bonus episodes every Monday. This will be for the next 10 weeks. It is a program that I had put together for some email lists that I had. And that program was actually 14 weeks, but I can talk a lot more than what I can type. Actually, I can type a ton, but putting it into an email and having it into like daily nuggets, like this 14-day program was, became a little much. So I had broken it down into smaller bits. So I have some additional information to add to the 10-week course. So if you did the 14-day course through my website, don't feel like you can't listen to the 10 days. I think I'll provide enough different information and I'm packaging it in a little bit of a different order that you would still get benefit of it. So I'm really excited to get that going. And the first episode is going to launch on September 3rd. And then for the next 10 weeks, you will see a bonus episode every Monday. And that is in addition to my regular episodes every Friday. I'm not doing those. Those will still be here for you. So let's jump into the talk about emotional intelligence and the way to kind of manage your emotions and learn how to process them more. I do want to start by saying, again, my disclaimer that I am not a licensed therapist. I do not have a degree in anything of this sort. I am merely sharing the things that really helped me and the things that I have found that have helped others as I've been sharing kind of my message with more people. And again, if you are struggling, if the tips that I'm giving are just not quite enough, if you feel like you are going to harm yourself or harm others, please, I do ask that you find a licensed therapist in your area that can help you work through those. We all have parts of ourselves. I talk about the book More Yourself by Sarah Waters quite a bit in my content. I highly recommend it. I will link it down in the show notes. And essentially what Sarah teaches us is that all of us have parts, and these parts kind of flare up in different types of way. And not any of them is bad by any means. They're really there to protect you. So a reaction that you have to something is a part that could be overreacting. It can be kind of on hyperdrive. And if you're looking for ways to tone it back down, get back to your kind of base level, feel more like yourself, more able to deal with kind of the day-to-day life, any kind of goals that you have, your desired outcomes, then recognizing that these parts are there to support you. They are there to help you, because the biggest part of you, right, the thing that's the most important, is truly your sense of self. And when you have something that threatens that sense of self, you can have a part of you that starts to kind of flare up. And sometimes those are deemed negative either by yourself or by society, whether you kind of struggle with rage, if you have issues with feeling very lonely, if you get sad, if you're struggling to find kind of the joy in your everyday, then really digging in with either kind of tools that I'm going to give today. You can work through these on your own by all means, or by reaching out to a licensed therapist in your area, you can start to calm these parts of you. So essentially what you're doing is allowing them to be heard, not suppressing them. And that comes back to this like toxic positivity conversation. When I first got into trying to reframe my mind and really focus on the positive and be open to more positive outcomes and seeing the positive in my life and not being on a negative spiral, the message that I got from the community was that essentially you have to be happy all the time. Your vibration needs to be up. So if you're not up all the time, then you unfortunately are attracting all these bad things into your life. And everything bad that happens is a result of you not being happy enough. That was my impression of the message. And what ended up happening was, because I was suppressing everything, it just got louder. And I didn't recognize that at the time. This has been a hindsight kind of eye-opening experience for me, was to say, oh my gosh, the more that I suppressed these emotions, the more that I didn't address them either with myself or even with another person, the more that they just got louder and louder and louder and harder for me to manage. And it became harder for me not to fall into a spiral of kind of doom and gloom type of thinking. And I've never been somebody to struggle with depression, and like the, inability to even get out of bed or kind of leave the house. That has not been something that I have been directly affected by, but I do have friends and family members that have been directly affected by that. And I think a lot of times from my experience with that, it has been a suppression, right? And you may not even recognize that you're suppressing those emotions at first. But there could be things either from your current life that you're living, thing from many years ago or from your childhood, that is really scary to face. And it's really scary to go back to it and really present yourself back into these emotions, because any kind of traumatic event, when you relive it, you actually can relive it. Your body can go into the same type of feeling that you had when you were in the middle of that, event. About 2 years ago, I had, a traumatic event for my life. And I have noticed still to this day that even though it's becoming better and I'm able to manage it better, if I return to it, I still get that feeling of like, my stomach being tied up in knots. I get really warm, maybe my hands feel a little sweaty. And so those are physical manifestations of the emotional trauma that I went through at that time. And for a while, I just tried to not address it. I tried to not confront it and just kind of leave it where it was, and essentially act like, there was no problem and I didn't have to deal with anything. And that was definitely not the way for me to handle that. So this event actually kind of spurred me a little bit harder into realizing like the emotional intelligence. I will say growing up, I don't feel like it's something that I had really learned. And so my ability to have a conversation that was maybe a little bit more difficult, either with a loved one or even a colleague at work, a coworker, somebody who reported to me, my boss, family members, friends, was really difficult for me. I struggled and I kept just saying, well, I'm somebody who doesn't really like confrontation. And it doesn't have to actually be confrontation. When you take the emotion out, and you can do this in a few different ways, but when you take the time to calm yourself, step back out of the emotional reaction and then consider the way that you want to talk about this event, either to your significant other, to your friend, to the colleague at work, or even just to yourself, either through like physically talking to yourself, which I do quite often, or by journaling it out, which I also do quite often. You're able to really allow that part of yourself to be heard. And there's a few different ways to do this. So in the moment, if you have a knee-jerk reaction, I always go back to, and I say always, I attempt to always go back to my breathing exercises. So there's a few different ones that you can look up online. The one that I like that calms me down the most is a really big, deep breath in. I hold it for a second at the top, and then I take another quick breath in, and it'll literally feel like my lungs are going to explode. Like I cannot get any more air in my lungs. And I hold it for, maybe 1 to 3 seconds, and then I slowly release it through my mouth. It really only takes one breath like this for me to immediately start to calm down and at least have enough of insight and kind of time to pause myself and really be a little bit more considerate about what I'm going to do in my next step. If I still feel that, really heavily adrenaline charged feeling, then I'll do a couple more breaths. I've also been learning how to walk away from a situation. So if I'm frustrated and the conversation is not going well, guess what? You can ask to leave. Like you can say, I'm going to need a break. I'm feeling X way. Like I'm feeling defensive. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling like you've hurt my feelings, or like I feel like my feelings are hurt. And then you can leave the situation and say, I need a break. Can we come back to this in 20 minutes? I need a break. Can we talk about this in an hour? And then I purposely remove myself, go do my breathing exercises. And then also sometimes, which I'm getting better at, is I focus on doing one of my joys for my list of joys. So if you're new here, something that I always recommend is that to get started on any changes in your life, to change your mindset, change the habits that you're doing, that you write out a list of joys, and very simple joys. I mean, some can be bigger, but I always recommend starting smaller. Little joys, smelling the flowers when you're on a walk, watching the clouds in the sky, seeing the sunset, petting a dog, petting your cat, whichever it is, but find a list of simple joys and then go do those. Actively put them into your day. Consciously add these to your day, especially when you're upset, and try to change your mind to focus on the event that you're doing. Tell yourself, I'm adding joy to my day. I'm doing this for me. This is part of my self-care, and I'm going to take care of myself by going and doing a face mask, even though I'm upset. And you can start to find the things that work for you and the things that don't work for you. Like I cannot go, if I'm really upset, I have not been able to figure out how to go do like a meditation. My mind just continues to go back and I have mental arguments and I have to continue bringing myself back. And that gets a little stressful for me. So I have found physical things instead. I will go do the dishes. I will go run the vacuum. I will go take a walk outside, but I'll do something physical. And that usually is able to break me out of whatever kind of cycle I'm in. And then I get out a piece of paper and I write out what I'm feeling in this kind of way. I feel X emotion about blank situation, and this is what I need. My hardest thing for me as a recovering people pleaser is to answer that I need. I always want to change it to I'd really appreciate, I'd like if, or just leave it out completely. But I think it's important to say what we need. This goes back to like being selfish, prioritizing yourself. There is nothing wrong. If there is somebody that is important enough to you that you are taking this time out to decide how you want to respond to them, you are prioritizing the relationship over the outcome of this conversation, right? Like in time with all these different tools, you're learning how to present yourself that shows that the relationship is actually the top priority to you. And so when you self-prioritize yourself and you say, you know what, this is important enough to me and to myself for this relationship that I'm going to list this out. I'm going to find a better way for us to talk about this. Then I should be able to share what my needs are within this situation as well. So again, the best way to do that is to remove yourself from whatever situation you're having until you're able to calm yourself down. And for different people, that's going to look like many different things. But essentially, you need to also remember your emotional reactions are another habit loop. So we've been talking about habit loops a lot over the past few weeks. It's what I talk about across all of my channels. And your emotional reactions to event are because it's a routine. You've had a trigger and you've fallen into the routine. There's no need to beat yourself up about that, but you can make the decision that you no longer want to behave in that way. Instead, you want to start shifting your mindset and handling your disagreements, conflicts, whatever it is in your life in a different way. And I have found too that sometimes if I take a step back and I just calm myself and I wait a while to respond, I'll actually find that my initial thing that I thought I was upset about is not actually what I was upset about. That might have triggered something in me that really kind of like set me off. But when I look at the core of it and I get really curious about the way that I'm feeling, I don't actually feel that way anymore. And this brings me to another point of a habit that I highly recommend that you get out of. And that's saying that you are something. I am sad. I am mad. I am angry. I am reactive, whatever it is. Stop labeling yourself like that. Instead, just start labeling that they're feelings. I feel sad. I feel upset. I feel misunderstood. I feel overwhelmed. I feel disappointed. I could go on and on. And this even goes for like happy feelings, right? If you're saying, okay, I feel X way, well, and it's a happy one, then go ahead and find like, what would be the word that could identify to that? Like, I feel serene. I feel calm. I feel at peace. But make them all I feels instead of I am. So you don't want to label yourself as your feeling because it really is your feeling. And I personally believe like we are souls with a human body, right? Like I've talked about my belief in God, how God is absolutely everything, the universe, life source, whatever you want to call it, and that we are all fragments of God. We are all part of God, and that is what our soul is. And so we are not really these like human bodies, and that's it. Instead, I am part of something bigger, which means that really I'm just feeling something. I'm not that thing. I'm not sad. I am not mad. I feel those emotions. And that really slight shift just kind of helps to take your feelings and break it out from your identity of yourself. There's this great book that I read. It's called Mind Hacking Happiness, and it's by Sean Webb, and I will definitely link it below. He's got two, volume 1 and volume 2. I found both to be phenomenal. I also really like his content online. I just think, he shares quite a bit, and I think he's got some really good information on the way that you can hack feeling happier overall. And one of the things that he talks about is your self map. And if you take a look at your self map, imagine, and I'm going to try to explain this in podcast form, but imagine that if you like made a fist with your hand and that little tiny circle part, that's you. That is your identity. That is your self, your sense of self. And that's really important to you. And around that, almost like an orbit, are all the things that matter to you. And when you start really close to your orbit, those are things that matter a lot. And the further out you get, those are things that matter a little. And you can actually draw one out for yourself and start to see where your triggers are, right? Like I know my triggers are going to be with trust issues. I do not like feeling like I cannot trust somebody. It's definitely an issue for me. So if there's a trust thing that comes up, I know that I'm going to be triggered. I also know that my children are one of my triggers. So it doesn't matter who you are. If I feel like you're saying something that I don't like about my kids, or you're doing something that I don't like about my kids, that's going to elicit a reaction out of me. And some of that I can trace back to my childhood. It's not to say that I don't think my children should be important to me by any means, but there are things that happened in my childhood that I know are directly affecting my triggering kind of knee-jerk reaction if I feel like somebody is being unfair or a little bit harsh with my kids. But then there's stuff that gets a little bit further out, right? Like maybe midline for me is getting cut off really bad in traffic. It's not that I really care that you cut me off, but I do care that you kind of threatened my sense of self, my sense of safety. So if I feel safe in the car and you cut me off and I slam on my brakes, you've scared me, and that will trigger a response from me. And then even further out, I think I've talked about on here before is, like political party. Your political party is not going to elicit much of a response out of me. I'm happy to have the conversation about it. I will definitely talk about kind of my views and where I think our politics are going, but I'm not somebody who's going to be a keyboard warrior online. I'm not trying to pick fights. And part of that is also because any of this stuff, I've also made a decision of what is close to me. Is it the people on Facebook or the people on Nextdoor, which I think Nextdoor is US only. So if you're outside of the US, it's like a community app that it's like a website and you can join it. It's almost like a social thing, but for your specific community. So it's not really your friends, it's people who live within your community. And I don't know about everybody else's community, but the ones that I have lived in, I left Nextdoor because it just became so negative. Like it was just really people complaining. That was kind of the majority of stuff. And so I made a decision that was not on my self map. I don't really care what the people on Nextdoor are complaining about. I don't want to spend my time or my energy on that. And that's something else that you can do is draw out this map, start identifying what your triggers are, and see which ones you can remove. Like if you get on Twitter, aka X, and know that you get into political fights with people on Twitter, ask yourself, is this beneficial to me? Am I doing much of anything? What is the reward or the outcome that I'm getting from this? And if you have one, great, by all means, you do you. But if you don't, ask yourself, why do I continue to go there? Maybe remove the app from your phone and start to create a new routine in the way that you use that kind of social channel, because you need to do things in life that serve you and that serve the self that you would like to be. So when you take a look at your identity, the desired outcome that you want, being really your ideal self, do your actions align with that? Is going on a social media platform and fighting with people in the comments, is that really doing anything for your life? And like I said, if it is, you do you. I mean, you have to decide what you want for your identity. You have to decide where you're going to draw the line in the sand. But for me, that was not part of the identity that I wanted to have. It was not part of the way that I wanted to be spoken to online either. I talked, I think it was last week, about, some of the kind of hate comments I had gotten on my YouTube channel, and I was not going to allow those to affect me. Luckily, it was minimal. It wasn't a huge thing. And I just turned on better controls, because to me, that's what I can do. I cannot control how everyone else behaves. I cannot control the way that other people act. Even if you believe in law of assumption, law of attraction, the world is mirrored back to you, I still do not have that level of control. And I cannot totally answer to you why we have some, and you can kind of direct your thoughts. But what I have found is that the more that you direct your thoughts, the world is going to reflect back to you. But sometimes that's by having somebody leave versus them like changing. And sometimes they change, right? I've seen people do change. I know that I've changed over the past few years. Friends of mine that know me from, when I was teen Cecilia, probably are not used to this Cecilia, because I was a completely different type of person with different kind of beliefs and attitudes and the way that I spoke and the way that I presented myself. And that's fine. We can change our identity at any point that we want to in our life. That's part of the beauty of having this life, is that you always have the choice. And by learning some of these emotional intelligence tools, you're learning how to move from compulsion to choice, right? You're not acting out of a compulsion, which I have to say is a line that I stole from Sean Webb's Mind Hacking Happiness Volume 2. I thought it was fantastic. The more that you learn how to be aware of the way that you act and stop to take a moment to consider the way that you want to act, you are learning how to go from compulsion into choice. And if you're a follower of, let's say, a Neville Goddard, and he talks about making sure that you're paying attention to your mood and that you are not dwelling in a thought that is, totally quote unquote negative. And I'm going to get to this in a minute. Negative or against your desired outcome, I think is a better way to say it. He never said you have to be happy and puppies and rainbows and sprinkles all the time. And trust me, I love puppies and rainbows and sprinkles, but that doesn't mean that I don't sometimes have like a dark cloud and I don't get upset and I don't feel like somebody hurt my feelings. Like I have those moments and I can be a super positive person and still sometimes have to catch myself of like, why did you just think that? Like that wasn't very nice. That's not aligned to the kind of person that I want to be. And what would be a better choice in this? And Neville never says you're never allowed to have a thought like this. What he says is that you don't want to dwell there. And the better you can get at your emotional intelligence, stopping your reactions and lashing out, and instead allowing yourself to feel, it's not about not feeling, and then getting really curious and kind of addressing those feelings, the better that you'll get at not dwelling there. That part of you that is upset, that wants to be heard then, has been heard. It's been heard and it's been soothed by you allowing yourself to actually feel it. There's nothing saying that you have to be happy and puppies and rainbows and sprinkles all the dang time. That's actually going to really backfire on you, because the more that you try to do that, anything that you try to force positivity, force the sprinkles, force gratitude, the more that it backfires on you. This is why folks have so many issues when they're trying to force these affirmations, and it works for some and doesn't for others, is because unless your belief is aligned to that, unless you're allowing yourself to be heard and you are giving yourself forgiveness and grace, which comes so naturally, and taking care of yourself, which also comes so naturally when you start to follow the outlines that I'll be providing not only in this podcast, but on my YouTube channel. And then also in the 10-week bonus podcast that I'm going to start on Monday. The more that it's heard and it doesn't bubble up and like start to kind of spill out everywhere. It doesn't start to scream instead of just yell because you're not listening and you're not allowing yourself to feel. That's the way that you learn how to process emotions, is by actually allowing yourself to feel them. And it sometimes feels kind of backwards, right? Like, well, I don't want to feel this way. But the more that you learn how to arrest these moods, how to bring your awareness back to what your desired outcome is, be more mindful and in your present moment, the less that you'll see it's difficult. It just becomes a natural process, and it becomes all the way back again to a habit loop. You have a cue or a trigger, you're going to fall into an emotional routine. And there's nothing wrong with that. You created that routine, you can create a new one. Do not fear in that. If you want to have the change, you will definitely find the change, and you can do it with some of these tools. So something else that I recommend and a tool that I use is I stopped labeling any of my emotions as negative. So I may have emotions that I don't want to dwell in, and I may not want to sit in them, and I definitely don't want to continue to feed them, but at the same time, they're not actually negative. And the reason for that is because every reaction that I have is an opportunity to learn about the state and where I'm dwelling. So if I have a reaction to something, is that reaction aligned to my desired outcome, the identity that I want, the state that I'm embodying? If the answer is no, then I can start to kind of question a little bit more. Why do I feel that way? What is the emotion that I feel? This is actually a huge one. So it's called the name it, tame it technique. And it was coined, I can't remember the doctor's name, but I'll link to the study down below. And they found that if you name your emotion, it takes away some of the anxiety around it. It numbs, and not numbs in a negative way, but it brings down your reactions and your kind of gut awful feeling towards it. And so there's no reason to name something as as negative. Now, you don't have to list it as positive either, right? Like if you're super upset or you're jealous or you're feeling extremely lonely, you don't have to label this as positive. Like that's going back into positive negativity or positive toxic positivity. Instead, look at it as neutral. Look at it as an opportunity to learn more about yourself. And this definitely takes time. This is why I always recommend that you start with breathing exercises. Find a breathing exercise that can get you to calm down, because that breathing exercise can then be your cue to kick off a new routine. And the new routine could be, I'm going to name my emotion and I'm going to start getting really curious about why I feel that way. And even dig in to see if there's something positive you can find in it. Even if the overall situation is not positive, is there some sort of silver lining within there? And if there's not, don't worry about it. You've got plenty of other tools to kind of start digging into your emotional intelligence, and this may come later. But if somebody cuts you off in traffic and you get really upset and you realize it's because of your safety, is there any silver lining in that, right? Was it a good reminder to not be on your phone while you're driving, because this way you were able to pay attention and see what was going on around you? Was it a good opportunity? And there's a silver lining that you actually had the opportunity to name your emotion and use your breathing techniques and realize that they actually work for you. So there's a lot of different ways that you can start to kind of reframe things, the way that you're looking at it, in the way that you're reacting. And so I do just want to kind of quickly recap that there's a few different things that you can do, right? The first one is to make sure that you're using some sort of breathing technique whenever you get triggered and you're upset and you kind of need a moment. So find which ones work for you. Start practicing them when you're not upset. So when you're driving, when you're sitting doing the dishes, whatever, start practicing them so they become like kind of front of mind and you can think about them when you're upset. The other thing is to not beat yourself up. Look at any emotional reaction that you have as nothing more than just a feeling. It's not who you are, it's the way that you feel. From there, work to name your emotions and definitely go beyond, if possible, the anger, sad, happy, kind of the core emotions. Really start to dig into what you're truly feeling. There's a lot of emotion wheels online, and I have found that it's really helpful and it calms me down because it gives me something else to do if I go and look those up, especially if I'm really deep in an emotion and I'm feeling upset. The other one is to get like super curious. Definitely start asking yourself questions. Why am I reacting that way? Kind of what's going on here? And then also I would spend some time, if you want to look up Sean Webb's book, Mind Hacking Happiness, he's got a website, he's got tons of content, and look up his self map. If I find a link to it, I'll put it in the show notes below. But you can do your self map and start to identify the things that are close to your identity and are trigger points. And then start to ask, what can I remove off of here? Like Nextdoor was definitely mine. I didn't really fight with people online, but it would actually bother me to like read the way that others were treating each other online because I just never understood it. I didn't know quite why people got like a rush or a good feeling from like fighting online. And a lot of times being this third party who didn't understand it, I would see like how things were being misconstrued, that somebody maybe was just asking a question and somebody got really defensive. And my perception of their question was not the perception of the person who got defensive. And so that's another key thing to remember, is that your perception is what is going to affect your reality. If somebody asks me a question and I don't take it personally, and instead I assume the positive intent just because that's the way that my mind works, well, then for me, like it's not affecting me. And this comes back to self-prioritizing myself. My peace is more important to me than me being concerned about what you meant. And on top of that, 99% of the time, I find out that the person didn't mean anything negative by it. They were just asking a question. And this happens a lot online or in like YouTube comments or text messages. And I'm sure we've all been there where like the text tone gets read wrong and somebody's upset with you or you're upset with them. And it's because of your perception. So if you were to go back and read that same message or have that person read you that message in their tone, probably come across to you totally different. And you'd be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I read it that way. And so that's important too, is to continue to question your own perception of what's going on. Why are you perceiving it as negative? Like, why would you perceive it as an attack on you versus just somebody asking you a question? I remember recently I actually kind of called out a friend because I felt like they were not, they're not coming to me the way that I kind of needed them to, or that I wanted them to. So I felt often ignored. I felt like I was not very important. And I kind of questioned, like, what am I doing in this friendship where I am just, I clearly don't matter that much. And I called them out on it, and I talked to them in a nice way. I felt like, hey, I'd kind of like to have this conversation with you because I feel like you don't really ever respond to me. And I don't know why. Like, if you don't want to be friends, we don't have to be friends. And their response to me, actually, it made me feel bad, but not feel bad like in a way where I'm like, oh no, pity kind of deal. Not at all. But it made me feel bad that I had allowed my perception of this really wonderful person to be swayed because they're just not in a part of life that they can give that much. And you'll see this in a lot of relationships, either with your kids or with your spouse, your parents, whoever it is, your siblings, friends, that not everybody can always give, 100% of themselves. And when we talk about relationships being 50-50, I think that's so unfair. You really need to show up as a friend or as a partner to give the other part that they can't right now. So there may be some times that I only have 20% to give. I'm tired. I don't feel well. I'm, struggling in some sort of area of my life. And I either have friends or a partner who's able to step up and they're like, okay, I'll give the additional because I know you can't right now. Or we're just going to have to accept that right now the relationship's not at 100%. Because neither of us has it in us right now to give that. And I don't do this in my own marriage, but I think it's a really great idea where these folks would come home and they would kind of ask each other before they got started on their night routine, how much do you have to give tonight? And if the wife said 20% and the husband only had 20%, well, then maybe instead of cooking dinner, they would grab dinner out. There's little things that you can do, and then it just changes your perception. Instead, you have empathy for this person because sometimes I can't give 100%. And it's not because I don't love you. It's not because I don't think the world of you. It's not because I don't want to support you the best that I can. But right now, the best that I have is 20%. And I'm trying so hard to give you that 20% and be the person that you also need, whichever percentage you're able to meet. But it just changes the whole perception of the relationship, and it provides empathy and love and forgiveness out to others when they may really need that. Because if I can only give, let's say 10% at some point, and then I've got a friend who's just kind of on me about how I'm not giving enough, unfortunately, it just doesn't help anything. And this is not to say that you should accept terrible behavior repeatedly from someone. If you're in that kind of cycle, you really need to take a look at your self-worth, the way that you're treating yourself. But there is something to be said about giving some kind of empathy and allowing people to come to you in the position that they're able to give to you what they're able to, because I think it's really important that you're able to do that. And it will make a huge difference in the relationships that you have around your life. So I hope you found today helpful. If you have any questions, please definitely shoot me an email. It's unleashinghappiness@ceciliahendricks.com. And again, starting on Monday, kicking off a bonus series for the next 10 weeks that will go over the ways to truly change your life. So I did this as a 14-day course that actually wraps up on Sunday of this week. And so I'm going to kick off this next one on Monday. And the emails that I have gotten about the successes that people are having are mind-blowing. Some are actually putting me into tears. And so it is really remarkable the changes that you can make in your life very quickly when you take pragmatic, smart steps towards it. And every day you just keep getting 1% better. So until next time, have a good one. Hey y'all, thanks again for joining me today. I absolutely love doing this podcast and I hope that you're enjoying it as well. If you did, I would like to ask you a favor and either please subscribe or leave me a rating and a review. It definitely helps me get my message out to more people and I would really appreciate it. You can also find me on Instagram at Unleashing Happiness Podcast and I have my website, ceciliahendricks.com.